Welcome, 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 welcome. And we are back. Another Conversations with Tony Mobley. And today we are having a conversation with an educator, a video production professional, and this is also episode 32 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. So my special guest is Mr. Bryant Shan. Why are we here? We're here because life has provided me the opportunity to have real conversations with real people. First, I want to thank Santa Claus, Chris Kringle, Mr. Greg Switch for our conversation on Wednesday. And I want to thank the team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley. So we are here to have conversation. We hope to help others with these conversations, but I need your help. I want you to go to my website, Conversations with Tony Mobley, and there you will find, once you register, an opportunity to participate in the Mukana chat. That is a chat where you can actually type in your questions, and you can vote your questions up and down. So we're asking you to go to Mukana, put in those questions, and then you can vote them up and down. And if you like this conversation and our past conversations, we ask that you like and subscribe. Set that bell so that you get all of the notifications of all of the upcoming conversations. And so now, Mr. Bryant Shan. Thank you, Brian, so much for being with me tonight on Conversations with Tony Mobley. And so our first question is, who is Bryant Shan?
Thank you, Tony. It's so good to be here. So I'm an Australian educator and I'm a research assistant specialising in visual arts education. And I was a high school visual arts and photography teacher for 20 years. And I taught in a rural school in northern New South Wales. And I'm now a curriculum advisor where I work to support other visual arts teachers throughout the state. I'm also co-president of the State Visual Arts Teachers Association, and I advocate and support all of those visual arts educators through professional learning. I'm also involved in video production, and I hope we can get a chance to talk about that later.
Absolutely, we will. So when did you know that this was the path for you?
Well, Tony, my path's really unfolded in very different ways, and I think I've been fortunate to have opportunities to work with great people and take on projects that really challenge and extend me and also excite me. I'm always keen to learn new things, and I tend to do a bit of a deep dive on something that takes my interest. So I really like to get in and explore. And this also often takes me into fields that are just a little bit outside my comfort zone. And so it's that learning and exploring and trying to figure things out that becomes, I think, something that's synonymous with where I am now. And sometimes it's quite hard. It's quite difficult to take on new things. But at the same time, it's about trying to learn as much as I can.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. What lessons have you learned from your parents that you're still using today?
Curiosity and a love of learning. So my mother was a primary school teacher, and she had this real passion for literacy as well. And my father had the mind of an engineer. So I think between both of them, being curious and really valuing education as something that's probably made a mark on me and where I've sort of come from, and where I am now, I think speaks to those two people. Also, having a great family who is always supportive. I think that's something that's continued to help me, especially when I'm sometimes thinking to myself, I'm just out of my depth a little bit too far. You've always got that reassurance of family, and it's great to be able to talk to them, because often, I've tried to explain to my mother sometimes what I do with video production and things, and it's normally in a very a basic way, and my mum, who isn't necessarily technical, would always just sort of smile and go, "Oh, okay, that's nice," but always very, very supportive at the same time as well. And so I'm proud to have the parents I've had.
Thank you for that. The next question is, how did you get started on this journey of educating students?
Oh, Tony, I think it starts with my own journey through education, because I didn't really actually set out to be a teacher in the first place. It was something that just happened always as these things evolve. I had a great lot of teachers when I was going through school, and very supportive of the things that I was doing, and they gave me a lot of opportunities. In terms of visual arts education and being a visual arts teacher, it sort of came from my own love and my own interest in art, of course. And I started off just like we all do, where you're drawing and painting, but then it continued, and it continued through high school. And sort of at that time, I think sometimes people are a bit more reluctant to do things like that. But that was my real passion, and I had a real enjoyment with it. And I think I also got a lot of positive feedback from it as well. And that's so important, because that sort of drove me to find out more, to explore more. It was just something that I did, that I didn't really think about it at that point in time. And so as I went through, and as I was sort of working out where I was heading, I was thinking I could do many different things. I went to art school, and I actually trained to be an artist, a painter and a photographer. And so from that, I got a real good formal education on what art was, that it wasn't just sort of doing your own thing, but it was actually something that could be taught, and having that teaching and all of the knowledge that comes with the field of visual arts was really important for me. And so the next step after that was thinking, well, what can I do with this? At the time, before I became a teacher, I had a studio. I was a painter, and I was just working some casual jobs, just trying to sort of make ends meet, and really thought about, well, if I was to become a casual teacher, or become a teacher, sort of, I enjoyed my high school teacher, and thought they were fantastic. And so I started to explore what it would be like to become a teacher, and going through the training was fantastic. And then, 20 years later, here I am.
Very cool. Very cool. So you did have a bit of the starving artist situation going on there in the early days.
Not starving, but it was definitely I was very aware of how difficult it was to start off, especially in those initial years. It's one thing, I think, to be able to do it, but the reality is that you want to be able to sort of support yourself. And at the same time too, I probably was not as confident in my own practice. I think after going through some formal training and working with, a group of very talented people, I think when you're just working by yourself and you don't actually have a reference point, and everyone's sort of saying, "Oh, I really like your art, it's fantastic," that's one thing. But then to actually walk into a formal setting where you've got people who are just as good, if not better than yourself, and are able to create fantastic artworks, you really start to get a sense of where the field is and what you're up against. So that can be sometimes be daunting as well. But I think I probably just wasn't ready at the time, and wanted to look at a few different things. I think I wanted to really explore what the world had to offer as well.
Fantastic. Our next question is, can you talk about your work with students in the visual arts / photography arena? Things
Oh,
that you did with the students.
Tony, it's being a teacher at the best of times is fantastic because you know that you're actually making impact on people. And that's just such a rewarding experience. But when you're a teacher in a subject like visual arts or photography that has both that creative sense, but also a practical component as well, it becomes even more important that you really start to develop the expertise within the students themselves. And a lot of the time you're drawing that out of them, sometimes reluctantly, but at the same time too, you're trying to put the passion that you've got for your subject back into the students. So that very moment when the student first sees a black and white photograph come out of the developing bath and they see that image appear for the first time, or the first time that they work out how to shade something to give it form, and it's those connections that you've passed on, that you've actually seen, and you see the light bulb go off in the students. That's so impactful. And you actually start to get a sense of what you're doing as an educator yourself. And so taking those ideas forward and thinking about, students who I've known and taught who have gone on to either study art or they've gone off to do something that isn't necessarily art related, but they talk about and they see me and they say, I had such a great experience in art or in photography. I mean, that's such a wonderful feeling that you get as well.
Fantastic. We have another question. When did you first work? When did you first work as? When did you first work in video production?
Very recently, actually, Tony, and I don't think about myself as a professional at all. In fact, I'm a complete dilettante in this area. I like to think I'm formally trained in art, but not video production. But I've probably received a trial by fire training where I've started in October last year, and so I've been doing video production, and more specifically remote video production since then. So I started at the beginning of October, and I've just done just over 20 productions remotely now.
That's fantastic. And I will say that you are a professional. And we'll get to talking about why I think that you're a professional in some later on. But you are a professional. You have participated in all of the office hour related broadcasts, live broadcasts, and there are not many people in the world that have done what you have done. So first of all, let me just say thank you so much for your contribution to Conversation with Tony Mobley and all of the other office hour related shows.
Thank you, Tony.
You're very welcome. We have a question from Tex Whitney of Sydney, Australia. How does your recent accelerated learning curve with remote production impact your current role in education?
So I think when you're learning anything, there's a process that you go through where you're a complete novice at first. You don't know anything at all, and you're looking for some skills, maybe from other people, maybe some instruction from a teacher or someone, and then slowly you start to develop an understanding of some of the operation. And the more you do it, the more practice you have at it, the more you can improve. And really, understanding your own learning and the way that you can actually learn yourself makes a huge impact on the ability to be able to teach other people. And this kind of comes into some of the work that I've done in my research. So I'm really interested in how students learn, but also how people learn and develop an understanding of their own practice as well. And so being able to actually know how you can get the best out of your own learning, whether that be through practical hands-on experience, whether that be on one-on-one training, can actually help you to obviously not only improve, but also get the most out of whatever it is that you're trying to learn. Because we do all learn in quite different ways, but at the same time too, there's opportunities and there's moments that you need to take on that you don't think you can do at first, but surprisingly you can. So it's actually having a little bit of faith in your own ability that you may not necessarily know in the first place. And to me, that's indicative sometimes of where I'm at, where I'm over my head at the start, and then I just try and swim upwards towards the light.
Thank you. And Ted, thank you for that text. Thank you for that question. The next question is from Roscoe Jones of Berea, California. Can you speak of teaching in an ever-changing area of technology and having limited resources in the classroom?
Yeah, so look, I mean, technology is really interesting, and I've been teaching for long enough that I've seen lots of different versions of technology in the classroom. When I first started, I arrived at the school with a floppy disk with my HyperCard stack on it, and I've seen it go through different versions where we're working with smaller computers, and then we've got cloud computing, and then we've had remote learning, which has made an impact as well. But at the same time too, technology is there as a tool to support the instruction that you're trying to do. So even though, for example, I might have just been turning it with a floppy disk, and then I've gone through to a CD-ROM, and then I'm on the cloud, the content that was on all of those formats hasn't necessarily changed as such. I mean, I'd like to think that my teaching lessons are better 20 years later than they were at the start. But the technology that serves the function of trying to teach and trying to educate is there as a tool. It's there to help and support you. So how you can access that and how you can actually integrate that into your teaching practice becomes really important. I think you have to stay on top of the technology that's available, and you're selective as well, because at times you can get lost in the technology for technology's sake. And if it's not serving that purpose of wanting to be able to help and support and educate students, sometimes it doesn't work. And being someone who's taught both black and white photography and Photoshop content, the technologies in there, both analog and digital, have both changed a lot, but at the same time too, there's an underlying concept or an underlying idea, an approach about how you can actually make a photograph. And so learning those fundamentals and those basics is really important to impart to students, and it's being able to do that. Now, you can talk about that through many different formats, and sometimes it's what is the best for the end user.
Very cool. Thank you. The next question, Ted is Tex is back, and Tex says, do you find the typical Australian sense of humor to be a blessing or a curse when working with international colleagues?
That's a good point. And I think in terms of working with other people from many different countries, but also cultures as well, I think you actually have to be fairly mindful of how you're communicating. And I mean, Australians are known for a very dry sense of humour, and sometimes it's a humour that's lost on everyone else apart from us. But I think more importantly, what I've learned from the sort of international distributed remote production is communication. I mean, that's essentially more important at times than a lot of the other technology that we are working with. So that idea of being able to have clear comms and communicate with intent what you're trying to do becomes hugely important. One of the things I talk about all the time is it really important to learn about when you're doing this remote production is understanding the comm system like Unity. Being able to actually communicate in a very direct way that is quite specific, but at the same time, it's not rude or it's not terse, but it's giving you the ability to be able to communicate your intention to someone else who may not necessarily know what you're wanting straightforward. So you develop this language as well that goes along with it. And I think that's really, that's telling of a lot of different social groups that you can be in. I think you have to get the language first. And once you've got the language, you're able to communicate, because that's really what we want to do at the end of the day. We want to have that communication between people. So sometimes you have to be aware of the Aussie humour, the Aussie slang, and you try and just, again, you're just trying to communicate in a way that's quite clear and that's intentional.
Very cool. Thank you for that. We have a question from Dr. John Idelson from Monterey, California. Due to COVID, what differences do you see in the attitude of teachers and students around technology in their schools and in their homes?
So it's been really interesting, I guess, in terms of where we are in the world and world contexts, and how technology in one way has both helped and supported sort of the learning in terms of both students and teachers, but it's proved to have its challenges as well. And it was obviously a lot of the educators across the world were sort of put in a position where they weren't necessarily as ready as they could have been when we first started remote learning. But over the course of the last couple of years, I believe it's really started to change. And again, the technology to communicate becomes really important. Now, some educators have been using online learning platforms for many years prior to COVID, and that's been a real boost in terms of being able to help students to access that information, especially if for some reason they were sick from school or away. But also the technology's been able to help teachers communicate with other teachers. So I want to give you a bit of an example about that. I live 6 hours from Sydney, and I'm in a regional area where I was teaching, but I was actually able to communicate with other educators on a one-on-one basis, just like we're doing at the moment, Tony. And that was because of the technology such as Zoom, etc. And so for me, being fairly isolated within a regional area where I'm geographically isolated, the technology allowed me to be able to connect with other teachers. And that was hugely important, especially at that point in time. Now, I'm also involved in an association where we're able to actually help and support teachers. And the technology changes there were able to give us access to teachers we wouldn't be able to on a physical scale, just because of distance, because of time. If you're trying to organise training, it typically comes after school, or it's sort of in a day where you have to, go away from your classroom, you have to leave lessons. So this ability to have technology working to support, whether it be in a one-on-one conversation, whether it be with a group of people, or even asynchronous, where we're having conversations that we record and then someone can actually access that later, becomes hugely important.
Thank you so much for that. The next question is, can you summarize your use of the different technologies for office hour experience, i.e. conversation with Tony Mobley, the cooking show, the 2 Belfast projects?
Well, Tony, I'm not a network expert. I won't try and get into the technical details on that level. But in terms of someone who is a remote operator, so that's me, where I'm here in Australia and I have control via an interface to locations that are sort of distributed across the world. So with the two Belfast methods, we have one location which is in Dublin, Ireland, the Accidental Theatre, and they have physical cameras set up there. They've got vision mixing switches as well. And so I'm connecting into that site either through VPN or through the internet, and I'm then using either a physical Stream Deck, so sort of like a small keyboard, to control the switching, or I'm also using a web page. So just a screen on my computer, and with a mouse, I'm clicking buttons. And I guess what's fascinating and probably keeps me quite interested about this is that this works and this happens, and that I can be sitting here and I'm pressing buttons, and that's actually having an effect on the program that's happening either in Belfast, or if I'm working on Todd Reynolds' live show in sort of New York area. So being able to actually do that is really both fascinating and extremely exciting. I think also at the same time too, it's not just myself. There's a whole team of us. There's a whole group of us who are spread out all over the world who are coming together to do this as well. And so what it's doing is actually bringing together more people who are obviously having more opinions, they're having different experiences. And so that collaborative group that's available and is really willing to be able to actually contribute to the production becomes hugely important. In terms of the other technologies we've got, we're using vMix with conversations with the Tony Mobley show. We're using a combination when I was doing the Super Saturday show with a cooking show. We had all of the different individual talent, the cooks, they all had ATEMs, but their individual ATEMs were being controlled with a universe page that was connected via Companion. So I had the ability for the cooking show to actually change between everyone's individual cameras, but at the same time too, that was being fed back to Dublin, Ireland, where it was then being streamed out. So the technology changes, but the essential production methodologies are quite much the same. Now, I think what I've probably got going in my favor is the fact that I don't have the prior production experience that would have been prior COVID or on-site experience. To me, it's all the same in one way. I don't actually differentiate between using an ATEM, using vMix, using Universe web page, using a Stream Deck. It's about more so the processes and the production methodologies. So you're listening to someone who's telling you via calling, cut to camera 1, cut to camera 2, or you're sort of doing that and someone else is working. And again, this is where it goes back to understanding how to communicate well, making sure your Unity comms is working, and being able to really clearly understand that direction and instruction as well.
Wow. Well, I'm thankful that you had the opportunity to work on Conversation with Tony Mobley and the different Belfast, as well as the cooking show, and I've stuck my toe in all of them, but nowhere near the experience or the expertise that you have demonstrated so far. So thank you, Brian, for all of your help and support for all of the shows, not just Conversation with Tony Mobley. The next question is, what do you want educators to know about what you're doing in office hours?
So I think that's a really good question, because I see a lot of what we're doing in terms of office hours and how that can actually affect broader conversations and broader ideas within education itself. When you think about what office hours is, I mean, it's a group of people like-minded who have some common interests, and they're able to come together and talk and discuss things. You've got people in after hours who can ask questions, and you'll get many different answers. So in terms of what that does, it actually provides a very democratic way of working out what knowledge is. And so when we start to think about the idea of sort of the right answer, which often is something that happens within education, it's about trying to impart the right information or the right answer. What's happening in office hours is actually there's more broader discussion where there's not necessarily one right answer at all. It can have actually many different approaches. I mean, a common comment is it depends. And what that means is that the person asking the question has to consider the context that they're asking that question in. Because for one participant or one person asking a question, it may be very different from someone else. They might be using different computers. They might need a different approach. So there's not a one size fits all. And again, I think in terms of education, that isn't necessarily the same way. But what office hours does is office hours sets up an environment where knowledge can be imparted across in different ways and affect different people as well. And so that's hugely important because the discussion that goes around, even just a simple question as we see, can actually have multiple different answers and multiple different contexts. And so that idea that there's not just a black and white answer, but there's actually nuances that have to be talked about and talked through becomes hugely important.
Yeah, and I was thinking about your answer as we were talking about it, but I think that I'm going to ask you, can you give like a brief overview of what office hours is, just in case someone is listening or watching who does not know what office hours is?
Okay, so office hours is an online group. It's also represented by a question and answer panel discussion that happens in a Zoom format that's recorded and streamed, and at the same time too, there is a sort of an ongoing 24-hour Zoom which is called After Hours, and that format you actually have people who just turn up and they're normally having a conversation with each other, and people can come in and they can ask questions about media and media production. So obviously the Office Hours global community have a background within media, within video production, within live streaming, but also a whole lot of different associated production aspects and technologies and methodologies as well, so that there's not one group. And I think that's what also makes it special as well, is that in terms of the field of media production, there's so many different aspects to it. Now, there's also a Discord channel, and when you sort of hear all these words like streaming and Discord and that, it becomes quite daunting, but actually it's not that hard once you kind of get through it. But at the same time too, I think it's important because the people who are turning up to these Zooms are people who actually want to be there. They're not just coming just to sort of have a look, or they're not a spectator as such. And that's hugely important because it's an active group who are willing to actually work together. And so an extension of that are all of the actual productions that I've been on, such as the Belfast Method, Accidental Theatre, Todd Reynolds Live, Conversations with Tony Mobley, Cooking Show, where they take a lot of the thoughts and the ideas that are being discussed and they apply them to productions. And these are real things that actually happen. So it's all volunteers. We're not getting paid. It's on our own time. But to be able to come together to work on these productions is hugely important for everyone, because you also get to contribute. So someone like myself, who doesn't necessarily have a background in networking or network infrastructure, can actually contribute through something, say, for example, doing the graphic design for Todd Reynolds shows. So I feel that these groups give us an opportunity to actually not only have our questions answered, but also to contribute back as well. So that's a hugely important thing, because you don't have to be an expert. The field is wide enough and broad enough that even though you might be a specialist, you're not an expert across everything. And so in one way, that's such a humbling experience. But at the same time too, coming in as someone who doesn't have that production background, I've been so astonished at how humble everyone else is. I mean, these people can have a huge amount of knowledge, but at the same time too, they're willing to take the time and to be able to ask questions and to be able to talk about what your own context is and give you advice, give you support. And they're going out of their way to help you because they can see something in yourself. And I think that certain something is there's an interest, a curiosity, and a passion. And that becomes hugely important, I think, for what this group is.
Thank you for your answer. I'm going to add a little bit to it from the standpoint of I am a person who does not have a video production background at all. I knew very little about video production when I started participating in office hours. And I want to say that if you're watching this broadcast tonight, tune in to office hours on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it normally runs about 2 hours. And there is a conversation, as Brian has said, and there are questions, and you can ask your questions through the Office Hours Mukana. And just to give you a little idea, when I first came on Office Hours, I was using a 10-year-old MacBook Pro, horrible lighting, terrible to visually see and hear. And here I am a year later, and I'm having a conversation with you on my show. And so if I can do it, you can do it. But you have to be willing to want to learn and experience some of the things that the people have to offer you in that community. It is a wonderful community where people don't mind. There are no stupid questions. They don't mind you asking your questions over and over. And it is really, really a really great learning opportunity. They also have a special session on Saturdays for educators. And so it doesn't matter what particular expertise you want to work on in terms of video production. And I will say this, that it is more than just conversation about video production. And I'm going to leave it there. And I'm so thankful that I've met people like Brian in this community to be able to continue to, learn and grow and stretch myself. And I'm happy to be a part of the community. The next question again is from Dr. John Idelson in Monterey, California. Do students become better consumers of general media and social media if they learn to create their own media production? Wow, that's really a good question.
Look, it is a great question. And I think it's really important because it speaks to the idea of the difference between someone who is a consumer and someone who is a producer. And I think if you're actually only just being a consumer of a product, you can definitely enjoy it, but you don't necessarily have an understanding about it. And I think in the 21st century, the amount of information that students receive, the amount of media that students consume is huge. But actually being able to understand the nuances and the differences between the media content and what is being communicated to those people, especially young people, becomes quite important. So this idea of having a type of media literacy, which helps them understand the nuances and the differences between what's an advert, what's entertainment, what's actually being maybe communicated to them, becomes hugely important. And the way to actually teach students that is to get them to construct media themselves. And so they're quite good at doing the initial media construction. I mean, we have the tools today where you can do a very quick TikTok video and post that online, or something on Facebook, or something on another social media platform. But in terms of the information that's being communicated as well becomes highly important. And so there's a combination of both the media production in terms of maybe filming or editing video, taking photographs, writing text, but also the deconstruction of that as well. And a lot of the time, students understand that this is important, but going that extra step into the deconstruction or the analysis of something can be a little bit difficult. And so there has to be a sense of working with the students and getting them to understand that there is meaning behind media of many, many different forms. And so having that media literacy is a hugely important thing that they need to understand and consider.
I agree with everything you said. Thank you, Dr. Idelson, for that question. We have a question from Ms. Laura Thompson of Texas. What are the benefits of learning video production for educators beyond the technical skills? What else can educators learn? Can educators learn soft skills?
Look, I think in terms of learning video production, I think what I've learned from it, at least anyway, is that idea of there's many different stages to video. And so when we think about that very traditional pre-production, production, post-production, I think that's got it's got a connection as well to what's happening in the classroom. And good teachers have known this all along, that if you're prepared and you've done that pre-production, whether that be writing out learning materials, etc., the actual production, which is the teaching within the class time, can be so much more effective. And then, of course, the post-production for an educator or a teacher is maybe doing marking, assessment, writing reports, and also reflecting on the production that's happened itself. So that idea of an RFI or a room for improvement is something that's actually ongoing with educators as well. So the idea of having the soft skills in terms of communication becomes hugely important. And I think in one way, these skills that I've sort of built through my years of teaching somehow prepared me in a weird kind of way for the remote production that I've been doing within the office hours community. Because there's a connection between both of them, that idea of being able to communicate quite effectively, quite clearly, but also understanding that a thing doesn't just happen by itself, that it takes a group of people, and you've got to actually be able to collaborate and work together. And I think that's the real key.
And I would just add that what you just said really sort of speaks to developing the soft skills as well. Absolutely, yeah. We have a question from Mr. Todd Reynolds of North Adams, Massachusetts. A day in the life of Bryant Shan. How does it start? How does it end?
That depends on what day it is, and I could have given you a much more linear storyline there a couple of years ago than more recently. In terms of a production schedule, if I've got a program on, my day may start at midnight or 12 o'clock or 4 a.m. in the morning due to the time zones. And I'll be on a production from 4 a.m. Where we're doing prep. Show will start at 7 a.m., go through till 8:30, and then I'm off to work. And I do a whole day of work. I come home. I can normally have something to eat. I'll jump on after hours. I'll have a conversation with a few different people. I'll then be interested maybe to look at or read something else. I'm obviously interested in learning about many different things, and then I try and get some rest after that. But in terms of sort of a remote way of working, it's actually really interesting because you can actually get very involved, and you find yourself sitting at a computer for many hours, and you actually have to then disconnect, go out for a walk, come back and refresh.
Wow. Thank you, Todd. What a great question. Let's see. Can you talk about future projects that you're thinking of?
So it's been really interesting that I've been involved in all of these different productions, but I'm actually thinking about how not only I can do more projects and be involved with the people at many different levels. I'm starting to explore things like audio as well, but also I do have my thoughts of going on and doing my own projects. And what I'm really interested in, Tony, believe it or not, and I might just start recruiting crew from this show if you don't mind, is that I'm really interested in making a production that talks about small, quiet things. And whether that be cooking or gardening or working at a very small and intimate scale, as opposed to the large productions or the big shows sometimes, something that's actually small and intimate, where you actually get to know that person, and whether they're maybe making a craft and the video zooms in on the person working with that craft, or whether they're planting, potting up a plant, or whether they're painting or making some sort of artistic work. Having those small, intimate moments where we can actually have that as production, I think would be a great opportunity. So anyway, that's one of the ideas. Also, though, being able to be someone who's a producer or a technical director has actually affected how I approach other things as well. So I'm working with a group of teachers who are specialists and experts who also do professional learning and training, and being able to understand broad ideas about production, but at the same time being able to understand things from a very technical level about how to get your audio correct, how to do video, what is the right video scale, has helped me enormously in being able to work with other people to make a better product. And that's one thing I took away. I mean, I sort of started with this whole thing with the idea that I was just wanting to get my Zoom set up a little bit better, and that's sometimes how it starts with people. And before you know it, you're there spending all your money on things and making productions. So it's interesting the way that I've sort of arrived where I am now.
Thank you for that. And so I'm going to do a bit of a call to action right now. And so I'm going to those of you who are listening and watching. This is an opportunity for you to ask your questions of Bryant. So I'm doing this call to action. Call to action. Ask your questions of Mr. Bryant Shan while he's here. And while we're waiting for a few more questions, we have questions, but we're waiting for a few more questions to come in. I want to see if the team can pull up some of Bryant Shan's great artwork. So we're going to wait on some of his artwork to come up. And we're also doing a call to action for more questions. And let's see if we can get some artwork up. Okay. So, Brian, can you tell us what we're looking at right now?
So you're looking at an oil painting, and this was taken. I painted this work based on a photograph that I took in a small little town south of sort of Sydney, and you're seeing two young girls trying to coax a big old Clydesdale horse into the gate with a piece of bread. But it was one of my earlier works, and it's a work where it actually talks about my dual sort of interest in both painting and photography as well. And so I've sort of gone through many iterations in terms of my own practice and my own art over the years, and that idea where you're merging between both photography and painting becomes quite important. So this one here is actually, it's based on a small little town in Scotland called Lundy, and I visited that many, many years ago. But my interest in painting landscape, painting people, actually it's about that idea of trying to represent something in a particular way. And so for me, in terms of art practice, you can have something that's quite photorealistic, you can have something that's very abstract, and I'm trying to sort of blend between the two and trying to give a softness to the work itself. In one way, they're representations of places and things, but the other, they're also imbued with a certain sense of memory, and that memory can often be fuzzy or hazy. And so that idea that a photograph is somehow supposed to capture an image or a picture, and then how would a photograph look translated into a painting, into an image, and then from that trying to reinterpret it again. So there's many, many cycles in terms of trying to construct and make an artwork. So as we go through it, sort of looking at different ideas. And so I've gone from that more a literal interpretation or a literal representation of a place and a thing to a much more abstract idea that's starting to blend. And you're seeing at the same time too, colors and shapes start to change and the actual forms themselves change. And so over the years, I've gone from that more sort of figurative work all the way through to what would be my typical practice now in terms of photography. And again, there's a sense of going in and out of both representation and figuration as well. Now, these photos that you're looking at here are all based around that idea of a square format within your composition. And so that sort of that idea that a composition or a rule of thirds and how that works within a medium format or a square format itself. And there's a challenge to it. So taking that simple idea of composition or how to line up and actually how to sort of work with an image and what comes from that. Again, I think setting particular constraints on art practice is hugely important, whether that be within my own practice or whether that be in the practice that I'm trying to teach students. And being able to work within a set of constraints actually gives you a little bit more creative freedom than saying, I can do whatever I want, it's okay. So by being able to sort of set these rules within my own practice, I've been actually able to explore a lot of things and see where they go.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It was very enjoyable to see your artwork. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. We have a question from Mr. Roscoe Jones. Who has been the most interesting person you have met since COVID began? Who would you have picked before COVID?
Look, I have to actually say it probably wouldn't be just one person. It'd actually be a small group of people, and those are the people I found, believe it or not, on After Hours. And it's been a mixture of both the Australians and also people from all over the world and all different walks of life. And for me, I probably would have not necessarily connected or known these people, but I didn't have an opportunity. And so finding yourself being able to communicate with people from around the world for me is something that's been hugely important, because not only you get to learn about other people and you get to sort of explore and ask questions to other people, but you get to understand and know yourself. And you're knowing yourself because you're actually thinking about different people's cultures, and you're being much more hopefully respectful, but also curious, and you're wanting to know more. So some of those first impressions that you have with people, you can actually start to explore a little bit more. And once you get to know them and work with them, especially, you get a better sense of a global community where we're not so different. We're all connected, and we're all trying to actually work together. And so the group that I've met, especially through After Hours and through my different productions, are people who I find fascinating and just want to connect with more and more. And I'm really appreciative also of the opportunities that I've had, because I don't think I would have had the opportunities or even the time or the technology to be able to connect with them. So in terms of meeting all of these other people through the Office Hours platform, it's been hugely important for me.
I agree. I feel the same way, that, if it weren't for COVID, as sad as it has been for the loss of life, I would not have been able to make these connections, I don't believe, if we didn't have forced to deal with life a different way in terms of having to stay home, and the development of Office Hour community. We have a question from Clark Lopez Waterman, Astoria, New York. Where does technology and art end and begin?
That's a great question. In one way, technology and art have both worked hand in hand across the centuries and millennia. And there's been a lot of technological advancements that have come out of art. And also there's been a lot of artworks that have actually utilized new technology as well. Art gives you the opportunity actually to be able to talk about and make things that that are somehow beyond what is realistic or able to be sort of thought about at the start. We think about something just as simple as science fiction and the ideas that have come out of science fiction and how they've thought about technology. And we actually see that come in place many years later. And in one sense too, I mean, technology like the pencil is probably the most refined thing that you can actually have, that has been so important in terms of art, but such a simple thing in itself. Nowadays, though, we're seeing how a combination of sort of video screens, if we sort of think about the idea of what's happening with the LED walls and how that's affecting production, how different sort of works, whether it be theatre or whether it be art, are using technology such as Zoom, which we use for office meetings, etc., and they're making theatre productions about that. So both the art and the technology work hand in hand. One speaks to another, and there's a sense that the technology, which can obviously be thought of as a medium, as a vehicle, can also really inform where the next lots of art practice come to. So you're seeing a sense that art often talks about the future and can be an indicator or a marker for where a future could be, and the technology is also trying to go there. But at the same time too, the technology and the availability of technology has made art possible and pushed art forward in great leaps and bounds throughout millennia.
Great question. Thank you, and great answer. We have another question from Tex. We have a question from Tlalak Lopez Waterman. What is the most important learning that you have done in your own artistic process?
That's another great question. So in terms of my own developing art, it's actually been something that's evolved over time, and it's about working through and developing a confidence and a sense in what you do. I think to a certain extent, a lot of us, when we start thinking about art production, is we're not necessarily sure about the style that we have or our approach, and you tend to start to explore many different things, and you think you have to have a single type of style to be able to be a successful artist or someone who's worthwhile in making art. But I think it's evolutionary. It evolves over time, and you actually have to have enough confidence to explore and chase down approaches that you may not necessarily have thought would work in the first place. Art, in one way, it's a mixture of both having intent and having a plan and an idea, and at the same time having enough room and opportunity to explore different things. And that's something that I think art as a medium and as a format within itself is hugely important, in that you can take some time and explore things and try things out. And it may not necessarily always work the first time, right? But it will lead you to somewhere else, somewhere you're not necessarily sure of. And at times it can be quite a daunting thing. And I remember in my own practice where I had a real sense of confidence about what I achieved within making an image look like a photograph, and a photograph kind of having a painterly quality, and I thought that was it. And then I started to explore more abstract ideas, and I actually became quite lost, and I lost my confidence, and I wasn't really sure about where I was going, and actually stopped painting for quite a while because it was so new, and I didn't have any reference points that I was used to. So being able to actually work through your own processes and your own modes of working, but also to be able to have an opportunity to be flexible enough and confident enough that it can change and that it can be something that you're not anticipating. You have to almost rely both on yourself, on the process, but also on the products that you're wanting to make that may not always be successful.
Very cool. Very cool. Tex is back, and Tex says, it's difficult to feel the scale of your painting and photographs on the screen. How big are your paintings? Do you prefer to work to a certain size or format?
So my paintings can range from a meter by a meter, sometimes down to sort of an A4 size or smaller. But I tend to work within a scale that I'm sort of exploring at the time. So in the same way as I was doing photography within a square format, I did paintings within a square format. And that proved to be, have its own challenges at the same time too. But I often like working sort of to a larger size. When you actually have to do things like murals, etc., where I've done things over the time where maybe for school productions, etc., where you're working on fairly large things, scaling things up actually becomes obviously quite difficult, but it's a challenge within itself, and it comes with its own different restrictions and ways of working that you have to put into consideration as well. And so thinking about that idea of scale for me becomes quite important, not only to what I'm trying to do, so that the initial starting points, but also to the working methods. You want to be able to sort of scale everything up or scale everything down. And sometimes there's a great sense in just working on a small sketch with a pencil, with a very fine sort of point, all the way up to a really big mural where you might actually be employing things like roller brushes and spray paint to make it work. And so you actually have to just work between scale. But for me, if I had my choice, something that fits on an easel is always better.
Thank you for that. JJ McKenna of San Rafael, California. Are there any particular art pieces that function as a muse or inspiration for your works?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, when you're in the field of visual arts and when you're in the world of art, you are constantly inspired by it. And I think going from someone who may start off without that reference to the art world or to prior art, all the way through to going through the formal training, you learn about obviously art over many different years and many different generations. And so for me, I mean, I look at work that was painted in the Renaissance, that was sort of made in the 16th century, but also very contemporary work and work that is actually quite outside my own interest. And so there's a difference for me between that idea of I'm seeing something and I'm enjoying it for a work as an image itself, to a work that actually encourages me or makes me think about how I can approach my own art making. And so there's a whole lot of influences. And then, of course, I mean, the subject matter that comes from the world is hugely important as well. So artworks are sort of these representations of the world, but it's the world itself. And it might be looking at an image, just walking out your doorstep and having a look at the sunset, visiting a place, having a memory of something as well. They all can merge together, and ultimately they have an impact upon what you're trying to do. And I mean, to a certain extent, the aesthetics and the sensibilities that come through art inform how you look at the world too. So you're seeing imagery and you're seeing pictures through artistic eyes. And especially if you're a photographer, if you've done any photography for a long period of time, you start to see the world sort of through a viewfinder point of view, and you start framing things off. Actually, artists make probably the worst drivers at all, because they're constantly looking at, around at different scenes rather than on the road. So, be careful about getting in the car with an artist.
Thank you, JJ, for that question. Catherine, I'm going to say Harrup of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Bob Ross, love him or hate him, how would you create his joy of painting program with today's technology?
That's an interesting question as well. So I think in terms of Bob Ross gives people who may not necessarily be involved in the art world, but they feel a sense of art or creativity within them, or there's an interest. And so, Bob Ross has served an important role for people as well. In terms of the technology side, you actually have lots of different ways and approaches at the moment. And whether it be doing something, whether it's via stream, whether it's via YouTube, on your phone. And I mean, there's many different approaches and ways, which is why it's so interesting at the moment when you're thinking about this idea of production, whether that be remote production, video production, or thinking about an app, for example. So the ability to be able to capture something for an audience, because you're wanting to serve the audience. So Bob stands for someone who's able to easily talk to people about how to both make art through instruction, but also try and bring out a sense of their own creativity, even if it's quite nascent and they're not confident in themselves. So the idea of an instructional video, which isn't very new, can actually have many different technological formats in today's technological rich world that we live in, whether that be in sort of online subscription where you just see a few different things. I think what's really important from that, though, is that idea of asynchronous learning. And we're seeing that more and more all the time. Rather than sitting down and having to watch a television show at a particular point at time in the afternoon, or whether it be, something happens and I've missed it, the ability to actually sort of save a program, go back, that the sort of watching on demand at your own time, at your own convenience, whether it be on a computer, a television, your phone, that's where the real interest is for me, is that you can actually serve the customer or serve the audience that you're trying to communicate with in many, many different ways. And so being able to tap into those technologies and incorporating all of those types of things becomes hugely important.
And I would just add, what occurred to me for you. This is for you, Catherine. So we've talked about the different shows, Conversation with Tony Mobley, the Belfast method, the different Belfast methods, the cooking shows, and these are all different shows. But there's a cooking show. Why not a painting show? So, Catherine, that's to you. We
Hit me
have.
up on Discord, we'll have a conversation.
That's right. That's right. Clyde Lopez Waterman is back again. For those that bristle at art or making, what do you tell them? For those that bristle at technology and technology use, what do you tell them?
Yeah, and look, I mean, obviously as an art teacher, I've come across this many, many different times where that initial reluctance to be actually able to do it, whether they feel within themselves that they're not able to do it, it's not possible, or whether they just don't have the confidence, that becomes hugely important in trying to actually get the best out of people. And so, again, having a community, having an environment that is very supportive, having someone who is able to take the time and work with you, because I believe everyone has the not only just the ability, but the need to be able to want to express themselves in different ways. But their perception of what that involves or what an artwork is actually it's the thing that stops them. In the same way as technology, or I've heard people sort of say, "Oh, I'd like to have a go at this sort of remote stuff, but I'm not really too sure." I mean, I didn't think about it like that. I sort of just jumped in and I explored it, and maybe naively, but at the same time too, I was actually able to help out other people, but I was within a community that was quite supportive. And you have to really, again, engage with other people. That's the point that's so important. It's about the engagement and being able to communicate and being able to want to participate with someone else. And so art by itself is often, it's quite a very isolated thing, especially studio practice. You think that sort of cliched idea of the artist within the studio, facing the easel with the painting and painting away by themselves. The art world itself, and especially contemporary art today, is actually a hugely multi-layered machine that involves many, many different people, whether that be working with curators, whether that be working with other artists, the idea of a site-specific work. And a lot of the works we see within contemporary galleries today, which people look at and kind of go, has often taken a lot of planning, and artists are becoming more producers than the makers of artworks themselves. Now, that doesn't take away from any of the creativity or any of the impact or importance that other artworks, such as French Impressionism, has, because the artist is the person who's guiding, leading, and has the direction and the idea for that work. And so to a similar extent, when people are sort of reluctant to use technology, they're not sure how to go about it, they're not really sure, what's this whole thing? It sounds very complicated. There are other people as well who you can draw upon, and whether that be teachers, whether that be other experts or people who are doing it. But at the same time too, it's about going about it yourself and having a go and asking questions and figuring it out with the help of other people. I think more importantly, if you've got a purpose for that technology, you'll actually find it works much better than sort of just going, I'd really like to understand how 3D modeling works without any purpose or any instruction. It becomes quite difficult. So just start off with a small project and start there and work through that.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for that. We have a question from Mr. Junior Grant. And with all of your exploits and experience with art, what is that one thing you discovered about yourself?
So look, I mean, I've really started to understand more and more, and especially as I've got older, that the thing that I do in art, whatever that is, whether that's be, taking photographs or paintings or whatever, that can be my thing and that can be good enough. And I think at the same time, you can be quite judgmental about your own ability and your own ability against other people. But accepting your own practice is hugely important in moving forward in your practice. That it can be a quirky little thing that no one else really understands or seems to want to do. But you embrace that and you make that your own, and you learn from that and you explore everything there is about that. And that then takes you to the next step or the next level. And that's okay. It's okay to actually sort of be separate or to be different or to have your own take on something, and accepting that and embracing that and then moving forward with that. And before you know it, other people will actually be interested as well. And I think to a certain extent, what I experienced in office hours was actually sort of almost a coming together of me thinking about all of these different things, but not having the connections, and then meeting other people who are like-minded as well. And those other people, you met your tribe. And for me, that was such a rewarding experience, because it was like, there's actually other people out here. They don't do it exactly the same as me. They don't think about it exactly the same as me, but I can see commonalities. I can see some shared ideas there. And so that's hugely important. And I've got a sense over the years as well that working in isolation or working within a community can be very different. And I believe working with a community is hugely important, whether it be art or whether it be technology.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that from the standpoint that I think that for me, it's a matter of understanding that I don't have to get things perfect, but I do need to make the effort to try to get it to the best of my ability, understanding that perfection is not necessarily a realistic goal, but you still try to give your best effort on all things. And so we have a question from Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It is said that imitation is the highest form of flattery and also greatest artist's steal. Where is the line between inspiration and actual theft? Between interpretation and exploitation?
Well, that's a very multi-layered comment, and I think it's really important to understand the difference between imitating, that idea of authenticity and your own work itself, as well as sort of learning and developing. I mean, a very classical way of being trained as an artist was actually to copy other artists' works, and when you're in the French Academy, you'd be working from sort of models of plaster busts, etc., to develop your drawing skill. And then once you actually had that, you'd be able to sort of develop some idea of painting by copying someone else. And you learned from what they called the masters. And it was sort of a canon of artists and artworks that were deemed to be, really great. And so by copying and by actually reproducing these things, you developed your own skill and your own technique. To a certain extent nowadays as well, we see, sort of different things. We've gone through that idea of postmodernism and appropriation and people like Banksy who are sort of, manipulating popular culture and subverting it and sort of redoing it again. And so we actually see that there's a blend. So in a sense, imitation in one way can be seen in some sources as sort of not original or not as creative. But there's actually a huge history of that idea of sort of copying and developing before you then go on and do your own. In a sense, what we do to learn in one way is we imitate. You think about it, really small children, they'll imitate what they see with adults, whether that be good or bad, all the time, because it's a form or it's a way of learning. I mean, for us, we see art nowadays as something that has to be both unique and precious and very special. But over the history of art, we've actually seen that there's a sense of artworks and subject matter. I mean, we think about religious subject matter in a lot of different religions. We'll actually see the same subject matter reproduced over and over and over again with no problem at all. But once we start to think about an artwork as a one-off or something that's, unique and special, we see anyone else who copies that as somewhat, inflammatory. So again, context becomes very important for that.
I agree. What I was thinking about as you were answering that question was that, part of the way in which we learn too is by doing the activity of following something that has already been done. And so, that's project-based learning, doing the activity that actually allows you to do the thing that already is there, but for you to do it, for you to experience it, to do everything that you just said. So thank you for that answer. Tex is back again, and he says, how does working across different time zones affect you physically and mentally? And are you an insomniac?
Well, no, I'm not an insomniac, and sometimes it tends to all catch up with me at some point, and I'm quite tired and want to shut myself away. But it's about a balance as well, and it's about a balance between sort of planning things out and working, and sometimes actually having to say no to things and thinking about this. And as much enjoyment as I get, working on different productions, it's something that I'm volunteering for, and so it's up to me to be able to say that I'd like to be involved in whatever it is, and making myself available. But again, being able to work with a group who understand that as well becomes hugely important. I've got my primary job, which gives me an income. I've also got, a house to look after, and I want to be able to also, meet up with friends, do different things like that. So there's a huge, other life that happens as well. But at the same time too, I really enjoy and get a lot out of what I do. And so I'm choosing to do this in a voluntary way. And I'm just actually having to sort of balance between, work and play, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, time zones are tricky things. And I guess, thanks, time buddy.
Okay, and so we have a question from Douglas Carmichael, and the question is, do you see a loss of human to human connection as we move into a remote/digital first era?
Actually, probably the opposite. And I'll explain why. Is that I think a lot of the time the remote or the digital first can actually give you connections that you didn't as well. And there's a certain sense of being able to connect and communicate with people, but also at the same time within your own space. And some people often find, meeting in person, meeting socially, difficult, whether that be from a logistics point of view, geographically, whether that be from their own social, concerns. Sometimes people just don't want to physically mingle with other people, but they do want that human connection. And so I've seen a mixture of both sort of people engaging the remote for wanting to learn more or find out more things, but also that idea of wanting to connect with people more. And being able to connect with people who are not within your physical, geographic, or local area, that is so important as well, because it broadens not only the conversations and the ideas you have, but it also broadens your understanding of other people as well.
Yeah, I just want to add that I know that in the office hours community, I have made relationships with people who I've never met, and the relationships are as real and as strong as any relationship that I've had with a person in person. And so, I just wanted to speak to that. So I don't think there's a loss in any way in terms of remote relationships. It depends on how well you are able to actually interact with one another. So thank you, Douglas, for the question, though. Mike Emmett from Melbourne, Australia. What's the coolest art project you saw from a student of yours or otherwise during the COVID lockdown?
I saw a dress made from face mask, which I thought was excellent, and it was all hand stitched together. But I mean, what was really interesting as well in terms of making art within the lockdown was that how ingenious students were. They were grabbing things and they were working with things within their own space. And you've got to think about it. I mean, schools that give you access to a lot of equipment such as kilns and printing presses and things like that. And so the ingenuity that you actually saw coming out of students and how they started to change their own practice became hugely important, and was one of the things that actually gave them a different opportunity. I mean, I spoke about before about the idea of constraints within art practice, and sometimes those constraints can be imposed by yourself, but also sometimes they're imposed by other things and other people. And it's how you work within those constraints and how you respond to that constraint as well. Sometimes they actually bring out the best and most creative approaches that you've seen. So I did see a few great projects as well. So one was a student sort of just did a little drawing, a little work every day of the lockdown period. And it was very small. It was on a pad. And then it was put together on sort of a huge board, and it was just incredible to look at. And so, just thinking about a few of those things, that's what I saw. But in terms of the ingenuity, it was so wonderful to see so many different projects that you wouldn't have thought would have happened within that kind of context.
Very cool. Josh Kaufman is back. And in what way has COVID changed the way we connect with people that will continue long after the emergency, or reorganization caused by the virus?
Look, hopefully what it does is it gives people a realization that there is more than one way to connect with people, both physically and so-called virtually. And hopefully there's a bit of a blending between that where we're able to talk and connect with people at a real level and at a serious level, but also, at a level of interest, of education, of friendship, all those different formats. For us, I think, for myself, I've connected and I've been able to work with and engage with many, many different people whom I didn't think I'd have an opportunity and wouldn't have thought about connecting with before. And hopefully, post-COVID or whatever that is, there's both the desire to continue those conversations, whether that be both remotely, just because of geography, or meeting up physically as well. Because that's what we've got at the end of the day. All we've got is human connection.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for that. The next question is from Mike Emmett of Melbourne, Australia. You live in a relatively remote part of New South Wales. Does the remote production make more sense in that setting, or does the non-availability of good quality internet make this more difficult?
So I do. I live 6 hours northwest of Sydney, and I am in a geographically sort of remote part. I don't have the most high-speed internet at all. I don't have the very best cutting-edge computer technology, but I'm able to do all of the things that I've done on a relatively sort of basic level. I mean, for me, all I've needed really is a laptop and a mobile phone, and I've been able to call productions. I've been able to meet with people. I've been able to connect in to the other side of the world. And so for me, both, not just for office hours, but also for my own job, for meeting with other people, being able to work remotely has given me opportunities that I would have never had before. And I think to a certain extent, it gives people a voice, and it's an inclusive voice, because a lot of, obviously, things are centered around metropolitan areas, etc. So having that idea to connect and to be able to actually have a voice is really important.
And for our last question tonight, what are you most concerned about for the future?
Look, for me, it's that idea that we somehow lose touch, or we lose contact with connecting with each other. I mean, I've found that the idea of collaboration can be, in a sense, foreign to people. We're suspicious of other people, but being able to collaborate, being able to work, and being able to actually trust people produces something that is bigger than yourself. And that's hugely important, because whilst you can have all of the skills and all of the ideas, to be able to bounce those ideas and be able to actually see those ideas go from yourself into a broader thing that is bigger than yourself is hugely important. And so being able to have those connections with groups of people, being able to make the friendships, being able to work with those people, is something that I think everyone should try and work towards. And I think that gives us a richer and more positive future. And definitely the people I've met over the last few months give me a real sense that the future is actually very positive.
I agree. The future is very positive. Thank you, Brian Shan, for being on Conversations with Tony Mobley. I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you. Looking forward to continue to work with you. And now I'm going to do my thanks for all of those who have helped Conversation with Tony Mobley exist and continue to function. Special thanks to Kimberly Mobley, Ron Mobley, Global Family and Friends, Alex Lindsay, and the Office Hour members, DVE Store, Liminal Entertainment Technology, Byte Hive, video360.com, approvedforloan.com, Cloud Bedrock LLC, Ken Jordan, Jonas Dattel, Aaron Huslich, Cherik Cheetah, David Brady, Marcus Lee Folk, Richard Lavery, Chris Fenwick, Manolo Lozano, Jeffrey Powers, Bo Cordell, Mickey McAchore, Hasmukh Gajjar, Douglas Moeller, Laura Thompson, Bryant Chan, Dennis Champion Walker, Roscoe Jones, George Butters, and the producer for Conversation with Tony Mobley, Clylok Lopez Waterman. And I want to say again to Mr. Brian Shan, thank you so much. You, educator, video production professional, thank you for your great work. And then next week, we are going to have Mr. Guy Cochran, video production professional. And because he is always doing things, he is one of the office hours, I'm calling him, video production scientists, the DVE Store's owner, Mr. Guy Cochran, next week. And I want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. We have coming soon more educators, mental health, filmmakers, musicians, other creators. We are having conversations with interesting people. So thank you so much. And we will see you next week. Conversations with Tony Mobley returns. Thank you and good night. Take care.